Hello and welcome back to the Hardwood Hoops podcast. This is episode 52. I'm your host, Liam Horsley. Unfortunately, I am not joined with my normal co-host, Ben Jones. He is away still with some family stuff, so he's going to be back next week and we're going to go back to our normal schedule. But we do have another guest for you. This week we're joined by CJ Marchesani. I'm going to pass on to my conversation with him in a minute. We talk all things 76ers. We also go through our Eastern Western Conference early rankings for our top 6 teams and kind of who we think is going to be in the playoff picture. It's a really good chat with CJ. He's a really intelligent guy, knows a lot about basketball and knows everything there is to know about the 76ers especially. So I know you'll all enjoy it. But also, if I could just ask you to go follow him at CJ Marchesani on Twitter and go kind of get involved with this website, which is called Roll Call. You can find the link on his Twitter page. It's a really good site with loads of different articles and kind of fan-made podcasts that I find really interesting and kind of helps you learn more about maybe some teams you don't follow as much. So it's a really good follow. But yeah, I'm going to pass on now to my chat with CJ. Hope you enjoy. And we are now joined by CJ. I think this is your third time on the podcast, CJ, so welcome back.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
How's life with the NBA back and no fans in the stand in Philadelphia? Is that weird to watch?
Yeah, it's super weird. Honestly, I'm just happy that there's NBA basketball back, and I'm very happy with how the Sixers are playing. So it's been a good season so far.
I was going to say, compared to our last week's guest, who's a Hornets fan, I was thinking that you were going to be a lot more upbeat about your team's prospects at the moment. But it's been a hell of a start.
I'm an optimistic Sixers fan.
Yeah, and you love Embiid as well, don't you? So it's been a perfect start to the season, I think.
Yeah, I don't have very many complaints.
Cool. So the plan for today is I'm going to ask CJ some 76ers specific questions that maybe the average NBA watcher and listener over here doesn't know too much about, and he can kind of fill us in on all things Philadelphia. And then we're going to go through our NBA playoff teams. And this will be our actual playoff teams, so 1 through 6, no play-in teams, just start 1 through 6, and we'll see how my list compares to CJ. So let's kick it off then, mate, with the 76ers chat. We'll open up with the basic one. What do you personally see as a good season for this 76ers team in the long run, including the playoffs? Is it a conference finals, or do you want to win a title with this team, or you just think getting to the Eastern Conference finals again could be enough as a successful season?
Honestly, I think that a successful season, looking at where we were at the start of the year, just like at the very beginning of the year, if you told me that we were going to be in the Eastern Conference finals, playing with a chance to get to the finals, I would have been pretty thrilled with that. I think that the first, 19, 20 games of the year has kind of increased the expectations now. And I even think Daryl Morey went out and said it's a championship or bust for this team, which I think might be a little bit lofty. But I think that a successful season will be, like, the minimum for a successful season will be a competitive Eastern Conference Finals series. But I think that now in Philly, we've been using the excuse that all of these last 3 years, they just haven't surrounded Joe and Ben with the kind of, fit players that they need to just accentuate their talents. And this is the year that they did that. They built this team with less of an emphasis on acquiring talent and more of an emphasis on acquiring players that, make Joe and Ben look good. So I think to continue with this team building strategy, they need to show that they can compete with the very best in the NBA.
Yeah, and I guess even if you don't win a title this year, by carrying on to believe in those 2 stars and to keep building the team around them for the next probably 2 seasons, that shows a bit more commitment than maybe what you've had in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it. I think that a successful season, even more than just like they do good in the playoffs, I think a real successful season would be Joel and Ben prove that they can be the guys, and that it is worth building around them. Maybe put to silence a little bit of you need to pick one and build around the other. I think that if they can prove that they can work together and the 2 of them can take the team to the top, I think that would be a successful season.
Yeah, and at the moment they are proving that in this small sample size, and their on-court numbers previously has been better than what most people thought. I know I was in the camp of trade one, and we've had our own conversations where I thought you should have traded one, but Morey seems to have got a team together that might disprove those people. But I didn't actually write this question down, but I think I already know your answer. Are you a fan of the fact you didn't pull off the Harden trade and you kept the team as it is rather than just completely shed all of your picks and all of your rotation players? Or do you think Harden would have just took this team over the edge?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I almost have two answers. I think if I'm being objective, the Joel Embiid is performing at a MVP level this year so far, which it has been well documented. And I think the combination of Joel and James Harden around Danny Green and Seth Curry and Tobias, because I think the reported deal was Ben, Maxey,
Sideball as well.
Matisse, yeah, and then a couple firsts. And I think that team, like that post-trade team, would have to have been the title favorite, if not the Eastern Conference favorite, and maybe a toss-up with the Lakers in the title.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with Joel, you never know how long his window is going to be. He has injury issues. So I think objectively, the best move for maximizing the possibility of a championship is probably to push the chips in and go after it. James Harden's a special guy, but the fan in me is really enjoying the fact that the Sixers are fun again. And I love this team, and I think that they are good enough to, maybe if you make that Harden trade, you have a really aggressive 2 to 3 year championship window. But I think on the back of Ben and Joel, you have maybe you have a less percent chance to win the title each year, but I think it extends the window out 6-7 years.
Yeah, and I think your percentage chance of total team combustion is also reduced with not having Harden / no other players almost apart from your stars. I think it was a clever move to not get involved, and we kind of saw the Nets bump up to Eastern Conference favourites almost immediately. And the 76ers, I know it's early, but have already proved that they're the more consistent team at this point. So I guess time will tell on that one.
I think a little bit of that too was it kind of seemed like Houston was asking for, I don't know, maybe if they were asking for $1 from Brooklyn for James Harden, they were trying to sell Harden on $1. They were asking for $1.50 from the Sixers, if that makes sense. I don't think they particularly wanted to do work with Daryl Morey, and because of that, the package they were asking from the Sixers ended up being a little bit higher than what they were asking from the Nets.
Yeah, there was a reported rumor, wasn't there, that the current owner of the Rockets did say that he would rather do anything than do business with Morey. But I guess if you'd have offered what he wanted, he would have still accepted. But I think it was just words in the media. But definitely an interesting relationship. I can't see many Houston 76ers trades being pulled off in the immediate future. So the next question I wanted to ask you then, on the kind of trade front as well, is there's been a lot of rumours about players such as JJ Redick. I did see a rumour which I thought was a bit ridiculous about Andre Drummond, but I don't see that one happening. But what are your opinions of the 76ers pulling off a big trade this season, or a trade just to add anyone to that rotation? Do you think it's possible? And if so, who is it? And why is it not JJ Redick?
You know it's not JJ Redick. I think that coming into this season, they probably were thinking that they needed to take a swing. And one of the guys I had highlighted to go after was Zach LaVine. I thought Zach LaVine would have been a really nice fit. He hides a lot of the things that Ben doesn't do well. And the same thing the other way around. Ben does a lot of the things well that LaVine doesn't. They are a very nice combination. But I think that the breakout, let's call it, of Tobias Harris has kind of maybe made that a less pressing issue. And maybe if you bring in a Zach LaVine, it actually kind of comes at the expense of a lot of what Tobias is doing right now. So I think that the first 20 games have maybe shifted the goal from let's acquire a star to take that next step to maybe just shoring up the rotation. And I think Danny Green, if you're looking for a spot anywhere to upgrade, I think Danny Green is probably the spot to upgrade in the starting lineup. I think PJ Tucker, I know we just talked about it's going to be tough to swing a move with Houston, but the rumored asking price, I think, was 3 seconds that I saw a couple weeks ago. And I would pretty happily pay 3 seconds to add PJ Tucker to this team. JJ Redick, I don't think is an option. I'm not a huge JJ Redick guy, no matter what, but he's shooting 29% from 3 this year, and he is quite possibly the worst defensive player in the NBA at this point at his age. I won't be able to cite this properly because I don't remember where I saw it, but there was a graph floating around the internet of all of the people that had the most blocks in the league and all the people that had the most steals in the league, graphed on an XY axis. And there was one dot all the way in the bottom left corner, and it was JJ Redick. He doesn't really play defense at all. And I think the people that he would be taking minutes from are the guys like Matisse and Furkan and Tyrese Maxey, who I would rather see get those minutes to develop and see if they could potentially provide something in the playoffs. Because I think even if you do trade for Redick, I don't really see him contributing in the playoffs.
No, I agree. I think from our end anyway, over here, it's 76ers are basically known as probably one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. And Tyrese Maxey, that's kind of what he's added. And I think if you add JJ Redick, whoever you played in the playoffs, especially if it's the Nets, just say it was in the Eastern Conference Finals, they're just going to target JJ Redick and pick and rolls pretty much all the time.
Yes.
But it's funny enough that JJ Redick's actually linked with the Nets as well. So I do think he's going to end up on one of these Eastern Conference teams, but I could see why he wouldn't be a good fit.
I think the most likely scenario there is no one really wants to trade anything for him, and the Pelicans buy him out, and then he signs in Brooklyn. He has a house in Brooklyn. His family lives in Brooklyn, and when he played in Philly, he commuted from Brooklyn. He didn't actually live in Philly, so that was one of the things that didn't necessarily endear him to the fans around here. And I think that given the chance, he would just go to Brooklyn if he had the opportunity to pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good fit. And if you did trade for anyone, and PJ Tucker, for example, do you see Danny Green being involved in the trade at all in terms of salary cap, or would you have enough to add another player and Danny Green kind of be that bench player that he became in Los Angeles last year?
I think that you're not going to be able to quote me on this. I think that they can make a PJ Tucker trade work with the salaries of Mike Scott, Vincent Poirier, and Terrence Ferguson. I may be wrong there. I don't think that they would have to trade Danny Green to make that salary work. And Danny Green has been fine. I don't have a huge issue with Danny Green. The issue is Doc likes to play Ben on the defensive end as kind of like a free safety. He doesn't always like to give him the on-ball assignments because I think he's right that Ben is very valuable when he's kind of floating and reading the defense and jumping passing lanes. But that has made the on-ball assignments fall to Danny Green, which 3 years ago would have been a great problem to have because Danny Green was awesome in that role. But his foot speed is down a little bit this year. It was down a little bit last year. It's down a little bit more this year. And he's having trouble keeping with those quicker on-ball guards. And I think if you can upgrade that on-ball defender slot, it would make the defense even more formidable.
Yeah, and then I guess in playoff scenarios as well, you can then shift Ben over to certain matchups, for example, KD, and just say, look, you don't normally guard on ball as much, but you're going to guard KD on ball every time he touches the ball just to try and limit his sort of influence on the game. I guess that would give you a bit more flexibility on that end as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the matchup since the trade that I've been thinking about the most. And I think that obviously no one in the league has somebody that can match up on all three of those guys. And when they go to their death lineup and put KD at the center, which I think is going to develop more as they have more time. And I think that a counter that the Sixers are going to have to go to is actually move Joel onto KD. Joel hangs well on guys on perimeter guys, and KD doesn't have that foot speed that he used to. And I don't think without that move, the Sixers don't have enough wings to match up with all of the guys that the Nets can throw at you, unless they're kind of just tanking on the offensive end and they go to like a Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, Tyrese Maxey, lineup, and then that lineup just wouldn't score.
Well, it might score on the Nets.
Yeah,
potentially.
It really might score on the Nets.
But yeah, it might not get to the 140s, 120s, which you might need to do in big games against them because, like you said, they're going to score a lot of points. But that does lead us on quite well, actually, to the Ben discussion in general. I know that you love Ben and Joel. Obviously, you've already said that. But in terms of Ben on the offensive end, a lot's been made of his maybe lack of scoring and maybe not being as aggressive around the rim this season as in past seasons. And that's kind of helped Joel almost score even more. And I think Joel's efficiency has actually gone up as well, which is to be fair, he's one of the most efficient players in the paint anyway, and that's only gone up. But do you think Ben can be a number two, a championship team on the offensive end? Or do you think that's why Tobias Harris's kind of upside being back there is important just because he can add some shooting? Or you're still quite confident that as the season goes on, Ben will just develop that offensive more and they'll kind of get sets that are made for him when Joel's maybe off the floor?
Yeah, I don't think, at least not at this stage, I don't want to put a blanket statement out there, but I don't think Ben is a number two on the offensive end. And I think that kind of leads into what I was talking about earlier, that I think that they wouldn't have had a championship ceiling without a Zach LaVine-ish, Bradley Beal, someone on that level trade to be that second guy on offense. And I think Tobias is playing at an all-star level. And I think that he has stepped up into that role as the number two on offense. And I think that Ben Simmons can be the second best player on a championship team. I just don't think he can be the second best, like the second guy to score on a championship team. Kind of like with the Warriors, how Draymond Green on those non-KD teams, he was the second best player on the team, but he wasn't necessarily the second option on offense.
Yeah, that's quite good actually, because they get compared on the defensive end as well quite often in terms of Draymond's. I know he's not as good as he was, but in those championship era sort of teams, he was almost probably the best defender in the NBA year on, year out. And I know Ben Simmons hasn't won that award, but that's just because of blocks. Everybody just gives it to bigs now just because of the block numbers they get. Whereas I think Ben is probably the best sort of 1v1 on-ball defender in the NBA, kind of similar to what Draymond was probably 5 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're very similar. And I think that a lot of that is what made this team construction so hard for Ben. I think Ben would be best as Draymond Green, unleashed in that light Draymond Green role on the offensive end. And when he came to Philly, Brett Brown kind of put the ball in his hand and said, he's my point guard. This is the point guard. You know, he has the ball because we didn't really have any other options. But I think, which is what has ended up happening a lot this year, that like Tobias is playing the on-ball role and Ben can kind of hunt in the dunker spot or come out of the short roll and pick people apart and kind of play that secondary Draymond role that just rips people apart from the middle of the floor and not necessarily have to get to the rim himself.
Do you think that there's something to be said that Doc, because I think you've played 21 games in terms of regular season action now, so it's still very early into Doc Rivers' coaching career with you guys. Do you think there's something to be said that he'll develop the offensive a little bit more around Ben at certain times? So as the season goes on, could we see more sets that kind of involve him running to the rim with a bit more space? Or maybe rotation changes if you do add a player and you can kind of separate it and get him in the ball? Or you just think that what you see is what you get from him currently on offense, and it's going to be that way for the whole season, and nothing will change offensively for Ben Simmons?
As much as I hate to say it, I think it's probably closer to the latter there.
Yeah.
When Ben is aggressive, when Ben puts down his shoulder and gets to the rim, there aren't very many people in the league that can stay in front of him. The issue with that is he doesn't really maintain that for more than a quarter at a time. He's not consistently aggressive. And I think it's a little bit hard for him with this team construction because last year, for all of and we've talked about this, the 89 million flaws that the Sixers team had last year, the one singular good thing that they were able to do was when Joel was out of the game, Ben played with a floor spacing center in Al Horford. And he kind of had the whole offensive side of the ball to work with because Al would space the floor and then Ben could just hunt those paint touches. And with Dwight Howard as the backup center this year, they have developed a nice little pick and roll chemistry. They're playing well, but it kind of limits the amount that Ben can spend in the paint because all of the minutes he plays, he's usually either with Ben or he's either with Joel or Dwight. Which limits him a little bit. I think I saw some things that they were going to experiment a little bit with the Ben at the 5 on defense thing, but he's not really a rim protector as much as he's a 1 through 4 ball hawk that just can absolutely shut down somebody on the perimeter. So those lineups tend to bleed points a little bit. So it's kind of, sure, it's a better offensive lineup, and it will definitely be a look that you see them turn to in the playoffs when they're looking for a spark. But I'm not so sure it's the long-term solution. Yeah,
and I think that's also a real big benefit of how well Joel's played to start the season, because he's been a monster offensively, hasn't he? So any sort of, not worries with Ben, because it's not a worry, but any sort of, when you compare him to other superstars, just say Luka, for example, who's a bigger person that brings the ball up, you don't need to worry about Ben having to score 30 points a night, because Joel's going to get 30 points a night, whereas other teams haven't got that luxury. So I think that can take a little bit of pressure off him, which is vital. And that's kind of why all the times where you've got into the playoffs and one of them's been injured, that's been the annoying part, because Ben can't quite thrive without Joel on the offensive end, because he doesn't score enough points. And obviously, defensively, if Ben's not in the team, you guys are not quite the same team. So I think that Joel playing so well is only going to help the team and kind of just make Ben be a little bit more relaxed on the offensive end, and he can kind of go and focus on defense, which helps.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a faction of Philly sports fans coming into this year that wanted to trade Joel and build around Ben. And I kind of think that Ben has shown that he is not the guy on a championship team. Joel's playing at the point right now where you can pretty confidently say that he can be the best player on a championship team. Mm-hmm. He is at that level of a top, let's just be generous and say 7, even though I think I'd be higher than 7 right now. He's a top 7 guy in the league. And I don't think Ben has proven that he can make that run into the top 15-ish. He's more of a top 25 guy. But he is, for a lot of teams in the league, he's a perfect second star, because he doesn't demand touches. He works hard on the defensive end, and he sets up his other teammates. And him and Joel, their chemistry is kind of taking off on the court this year. They're finding each other a lot. And Joel is drawing so much attention from double teams that he's doing a really good job of just finding Ben, slipping in the holes of the double teams for dunks and dump offs. And their chemistry, I think, in this year together is really taking off and clicking.
Yeah, and they probably could be 2, or maybe are 2 top 5 defensive players as well. So in terms of that end of the floor, you're going to get absolute elite defensive play. So it can drop off a little bit on the offensive end. Cool. Going on to the next question then, which kind of involves Tobias Harris, like we were talking about earlier. How many All-Stars do you realistically think the 76ers will have this season? We don't know if there'll be an actual game, obviously. There's still rumours that they're going to try and play a game in Atlanta, which I'm not quite sure getting a load of NBA players to Atlanta is the best idea in a pandemic, but we'll see if that happens. But if there is a game, do you think you're going to get those 3 stars, or you think that maybe 2 players will be a max? We know Embiid's probably going to be a starter, but aside from him, who's got a shot, you think?
Joel's a lock. I think it'll probably be Joel and Tobias. Oh, wow. I don't think Ben gets there. I think that All-Star a lot of the time leads or is based on points, and Ben has had offensively, Ben hasn't really had a great start to the year for even by his standards. He's been an absolute menace on the defensive end, and he's doing a lot of things that help the Sixers win, and the Sixers are not in this spot at the top of the conference without Ben, but it's come at the sacrifice of a little bit of his counting stats on the offensive end. So while I think that Ben is a better player and a more important player to the Sixers than Tobias, when it comes down to All-Stars, I think it's going to be Joe and Tobias, who's averaging over 20 points a game very efficiently.
Yeah, and if I'd have said to you a year ago that you've managed to trade Al Horford and Tobias Harris as an all-star for the 76ers, I think you'd have bitten anyone's hand off if they'd said that to you.
Yeah, you have me there.
That'd be quite cool, actually, to see Tobias in the All-Star game. I don't know if he's ever played before. Maybe I should have checked that out. But he's kind of got a reputation, hasn't he, that Doc almost unlocks him on the offensive end. And I've read a lot of articles about how Doc's offense isn't actually that great for the modern day era in terms of sort of scheme and schematics, and he kind of needs a lot of help on that end, and he's more of a motivator and a team builder. But for some strange reason, every time that he's played and Harris has been in his team, he's improved, and he's definitely been more confident and kind of shot the ball a lot better. And I wonder if there is a link between the two, or if it happens to be just random. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on how kind of Doc gets this team going for Tobias's benefit? Do you think there's something in that?
Yeah, I definitely am. And honestly, it was kind of just a low-hanging fruit. The issue with Tobias last year, and the reason that Philadelphia completely turned on him, wasn't that, like, he's a good shooter. He has the basketball skills required, but his processing speed can be slow. he does a lot of times you swing the ball to him, it's 3 passes, it finds Tobias in the corner, and instead of putting up a semi-open three, he puts the ball on the floor and tries to break down his defender slowly. There up until this year, there was nothing decisive about Tobias Harris's game. And I think what Doc did, or somebody took him aside and said, when you catch the ball, you have 3 options. You can pass it immediately, you can shoot it, or you can put the ball on the floor with the intent to get to the rim or to get to another shot. He no longer catches the ball, backs it out, and tries to take his man one-on-one every time. Mm-hmm. His decision making has been streamlined, and he's playing the game simpler. If he's open, he shoots the ball every time, which is something that I think frustrated a lot of Philadelphia fans. That Tobias Harris 3-point shot is a pretty efficient offense. You know, he's shooting 45, 46% from three this year. He's not going to continue at that pace, but I think overall he's a 40-ish% free throw shoot or 3-point shooter. So if you can get that guy looks, you want him to be hunting them. And this year he's hunting 3-point shots, and when he's not open, he's moving the ball to a teammate or putting the ball on the floor and trying to get to the rim. And I think that if that was Doc that unlocked that, he did Tobias a big favor, because he is scoring 20 points a game strictly on being decisive. And when you play with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, the attention on the offensive end is not necessarily going to be on you, and you need to act and react quickly to take advantage of the advantages that the other team's giving.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think as Joel grows and kind of not necessarily the MVP sort of chatter continues, but as he just proves how good he is offensively, stays healthy, the team wins, he's going to get even more and more attention, more double teams, kind of more people trying to back him out of the paint. And that's only creating more open corner threes. I think Tobias Harris when I looked at the stats, is like 3rd in the league, I think, for open corner threes at the moment in terms of hitting them percentage. So that's only going to increase if you've got someone like Embiid drawing double teams every single time down the floor. So I think that's a benefit. From a 76ers fan point of view, do you think that Tobias Harris contract has a lot to do with it as well? Because it's such a bad, it's hard to say if he's an all-star that it's a bad contract, but it's such a heavy contract financially. Do you think that there's a little bit of weight to that fans just see that number and they kind of just panic and think, oh no, he's not worth that, and they kind of downgrade his ability more than maybe they should?
Yeah, I think it's the Nicholas Batum thing. Like, Nicholas Batum in Charlotte was just beat up on every day because he was making $26 million a year to be, not great. And then Nick Batum goes to the Clippers and he's making $2.6 million a year, and he's the same player, but the perception around him is completely different this year. He's doing all the same things. He's doing them well. He kind of unlocks that Clippers team that needs connecting pieces. And people, he's not any different of a player. He just makes less money. So I think there's a little bit of that with Tobias. And quite honestly, Tobias got paid a max for a reason. He was never a max level player, but the Sixers had very few avenues to improve. If Tobias walked, they would have been pretty close to capped out already. So it didn't necessarily matter how much extra money they paid him to keep him, because they were over the cap anyway.
Yeah.
And he's a good basketball player. And I think once they sped up his processing and eliminated the hold the ball, slow down stuff that he used to do, he unlocked a little bit of what made him so good to begin with. And I think that if people tune into Sixers games and just focus on how quickly Tobias Harris is making decisions, they will see a very different player than the film that he was putting out there last year.
Yeah, and 76ers as a fan base are kind of one of the biggest, I would say, in the UK. There's a lot of 76ers fans in the UK. So I think kind of when you play like early Sunday games for us, I think a lot of 76ers fans are noticing how good Tobias Harris has been compared to last year. And I do also wonder, because there was this love for Jimmy Butler, and obviously you let him walk and sign Tobias. I do think, at least over here anyway, there was a little bit of bias towards that, because Jimmy's such a popular player and then goes on to do things in Miami. It makes Harris look even worse. So it's just nice to see him bounce back, because I've seen him play live a couple of times in the Garden against the Knicks, him against Carmelo, almost 2 carbon copies of the same player at times with their mid-range games. And he is a good player, and it's just nice to see him be able to play at the level that he used to.
Yeah, I agree. And he's a great locker room guy, and he's a good guy overall. So I'm really happy for him just on a personal level to kind of turn around his game this year. And I would really hate to see him just devolve into like the thing that Sixers fans all hate. I'm kind of happy he's rehabbed his image a little bit because he is a good guy.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So last question then. This should probably be an easy one for you. What are your thoughts on Embiid's run at the MVP? In terms of the odds, I believe he's second favourite at the moment, or at least in the UK, he's second favourite. Basketball Reference have an MVP tracker where they kind of look at all the stats that normally make people win MVP. He's second just behind Jokic, but quite closely. What are your opinions? Do you think that he's got a realistic shot?
I do think he has a shot. I think that MVP often becomes a narrative award, and the narrative early, at least from what I have seen, is it between Jokic and Embiid. And honestly, I don't think you can go wrong either way. I think that Embiid brings a value on the defensive end that Jokic does not.
Yeah.
But I also think that Jokic makes his teammates better in a way that Joel does not. And I think it's going to come down to at the end of the year, if the Sixers are the 1 seed and the Nuggets are the 3 seed, then it's probably going to go to Joel. And if the Nuggets are the 2 seed and the Sixers have fallen to 4 or something like that, I think it's just going to be like end of the year. The Nuggets are better, the Sixers are better, and whichever of the two of them is true is who's going to win the award.
Yeah, I would agree. I think narrative's important. And for me, we'll talk about it in a minute, but the Nuggets aren't going to be 1 or 2 in the
Mm-hmm.
conference for me. And I think 76ers are probably 1 or 2 in most people's sort of rankings in the East. So I think that's only going to help. In terms of the odds, Embiid is over here. He's over in your end. He's plus 550, which is 5-1 for UK listeners, and Jokic is 6-1, so a little bit further behind. But LeBron is quite heavily favoured at 3-1, and
Yeah,
I could see
I'm
that
not
being a
sure.
narrative.
I'm not sure I see the LeBron. He's been good. He's been great. Obviously, he's LeBron James, but he's not putting up LeBron James like best years of his
Yeah,
career numbers right now. I
he's not
think
scoring the same, is he?
for, exactly. I think for LeBron to win the MVP, it will have to be a situation where the Sixers fall off a little bit and the Nuggets fall off a little bit, and then the Lakers are the best team in the league. I think the team's success has a decent amount to do with the MVP award in situations like this.
Yeah,
But I got Sixers fan. I got Joel to win the MVP before the season started. I think it was like 15 plus 1,500.
oh nice.
So I'm looking at maybe spots to hedge that bet, and I'm not particularly worried about LeBron. I think it'll end up at the end between Jokic and Embiid, pending, both of their health.
Yeah, I've got Kevin Durant at very similar odds to you, and I've done it
Mm-hmm.
twice as well. But I think Harden might impact that. But that's a
Yeah.
similar story, really. If they win the East, and just say you come second, they win the East, and he's dropping the numbers he's dropping now on the efficiency
Mm-hmm.
he is after coming back from an Achilles, that's his sort of narrative, isn't it? But if they fall
Yes.
to third in the West and their defense looks absolutely awful, and then you win the East and the Nuggets come second in the West, then KD might be third favorite. So I think it's
Yeah.
definitely going to be narrative based. I think my Steph Curry bet and my Luka Doncic bet is not looking as nice as I wanted it
Yeah.
to,
You can just
unfortunately.
you can use your Luca bet as like a bookmark or something. I don't think they're gonna cash that in anytime soon.
I know. I'm very depressed about it as a Mavs fan, but we'll talk about them in a minute. Cool. All right. Well, that's your thoughts on the 76ers. That's really helpful for anyone that's not quite as close to the team. But let's go on to talk about the playoffs teams. We'll start in the West, move away from the East for a little bit. Why don't you kick us off? We'll start through the best team. Who do you have at the moment being your number 1 seed in the Western Conference?
I have the Lakers.
Cool. That is the same as mine. Do you see them being the overall best team in the West in terms of starting five and depth? Because I know there's been a lot made of how good their bench unit is compared to the Clippers and the Jazz.
Yeah, their bench unit is great, and I think that the bench carries you to a high seed in the regular season. I think relying on a good bench helps you get there. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think when playoff time comes around, I don't think that I'm a big believer in star players winning playoff games. I don't really take into account benches and stuff like that. It doesn't really matter to me unless it's a drastic difference. But at the end of the day, I don't think that you're going to find a better two-man group than Anthony Davis and LeBron James. Even Kawhi, you know, I think that the Lakers have the best two players in the conference, quite honestly, and it's going to be hard for anyone else to step up to that.
As a Luka fan, I want to disagree with you, but my the season's not doing a lot for my case at the moment.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I've got the Lakers in 1. We had them in our pre-rankings at 1 as well, and I think that they'll do enough. In terms of the second seed, who have you got in the second seed at the moment?
I have the other LA team, the Clippers.
Yeah, same here as well. They're currently leading the conference. I think they're 1 game ahead at the moment. I know it's early, but they're 1 game ahead of the Jazz. They look a lot better than I thought, actually. I know you mentioned Batum then, but even Paul George himself has kind of looked back to his old ways. And I wonder if the bubble was just... He mentioned kind of mental health and stuff. I wonder if the bubble was too much for him and how he started and kind of skyrocketed into him kind of being overly aggressive in his shot and just missing bad shots. What do you think he's kind of back to how he was?
He definitely, his form looks a lot better. He's also absolutely raining in threes. The Clippers as a team are probably the most deadly 3-point shooting team in the league. They have Kawhi at 41%. They have Paul George at 45%. They have Nick Batum at 45%. Patrick Beverley shooting 41%. Serge Ibaka is at 39%. Marcus Morris is at 45%. And Luke Kennard is at 44%. And that is just an absolutely incredible arsenal of players that you can run out and shoot the ball. And I think that, I think they'll probably come back down to earth a little bit. But if you're looking at those guys outside of maybe Beverly, they're guys that have historically been able to shoot the 3 ball. So I just think it's so hard to defend a well-spaced floor that also has 2 superstars, running with the ball.
Yeah.
I think Kawhi has never really been a great facilitator. He's not great at making his teammates better. And I think that might hurt them a bit in the playoffs when the game slows down, because it's what happened in the Denver series last year.
Yeah.
They helped a little bit off of shooters, and Kawhi wasn't necessarily always able to make the passes to make them pay. And I think if he's been doing a better job of it this year, and I think that if he continues to facilitate at a high level, I think they're going to be very difficult to beat, because they have they have an MVP and an all-star playing at a very high level, surrounded by tons of space.
Yeah, and I think not enough is made of how much of an upgrade Ibaka is over Harrell. Maybe not on the offensive end, but he's a better spot-up 3-point shooter. As like you said, the numbers there are better. And consistently open 3-pointers, he's a lot better than Harrell as well. But on the defensive end, they're not leaking points, because every time it was Lou Williams-Harrell lineup last season, I think the plus-minus numbers were awful just because of the defense. They could still score, but defensively they were poor. I think Ibaka's made a huge difference to that. And I think that could be what tips them over the edge if they want to try and get to a Western Conference final.
Yeah, I agree. If your big man is not your superstar, I think if you're trying to win a championship, you would much rather him be a defensive specialist than somebody like Montrezl Harrell, who is a very good offensive big man, but leaks points on the other end. And I think if your ultimate goal is the championship, you need to have a defensive-minded center if he's not your guy.
Yeah, I agree. This show is a little bit of a Harrell slander show. Unfortunately, we're not the biggest fans of him, especially how he treated my boy Luka last year. He hasn't got a good rep. Cool. Let's move to number 3 then. I think this might be our first difference. Who have you got finishing 3rd in the West at the moment?
Denver.
Yeah, I've gone with the Jazz. So yeah, it's our first difference. Why have you gone with Denver? What do you think kind of sets them out as the 3rd best team? And also, how close do you see them being to those 2 LA teams? Because are they in a tier by themselves, or do you think Denver are good enough to be in the same tier?
I think that Denver, if LA teams are 1A and 1B, which I think that they are, I think that the Nuggets are probably a half a tier below them. I think they can, obviously they did it last year. They can beat them in a 7-game series. And I have the Jazz right there with the Nuggets. I think the Jazz are great too. But specifically for the Nuggets, first of all, we already talked about it. Nikola Jokic is an absolute stud on offense. He controls the game like nobody else. He had 47 points last night on 100% shooting from 3. He is a killer. And to pair that with Jamal Murray, who, when the game slows down, if he can be the Jamal Murray from the bubble, the Nuggets are going to be very tough to beat. I'm not so sure you can count on that because he hasn't shown that he can maintain that over a long period of time. But when the game slows down in the playoffs, you need to have that guy that can go get you a bucket. And Jokic can do that. But Jamal Murray, as a perimeter player, has to also step up and take that mantle. I think that the loss of Jeremy Grant is going to hurt them quite a bit because as proficient as they are on the offensive end, they miss his rim protection next to Jokic on the defensive end. Paul Millsap gives you like 80% of that. But really, the reason I have the Nuggets so high in my regular season standings is that no one can score with the combination of Jokic, Jamal Murray, and Michael Porter Jr. when they're all clicking.
Yeah, that was the player I was going to mention next. I think that there's a chance, we're obviously quite early into the season. I think when it comes to playoff time, you could see Porter Jr. actually become that second option. And I think he could be the one that sometimes could go and get them a bucket over Murray, which is disappointing because Murray's had a bad rep, hasn't he, of kind of being 40 points one night and 12 points on 0 for 4 shooting the next night. And in the bubble, he kind of slightly turned that around. But obviously, there's no kind of travel, there's no fans in the stand. It's a very different atmosphere. And he's definitely kind of changed back to that. I watched him one night, I can't remember who it was now, but he dropped 37 and they played the Mavs. And he scored like 12 points and he missed 5 in a row from 3 in the fourth quarter. And that's the sort of night that if you do that against either LA team, you're going to struggle. So I'm quite confident Porter Jr. could step up and be the second man on that team, I think.
Yeah, and if that happens, they're up there with those LA teams. I think that the Denver Nuggets with Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., and Bubble Jamal Murray are in that top tier with those other three. The issue with me comes that you can't count on Jamal Murray to be that guy every night.
What's your opinions on them trading Porter Jr. In a trade for Bradley Beal? Is that a much of an upgrade, or with the salary cap sort of deficiency that you get and the lack of picks you'll get in the future, is it kind of a bit of a wash and maybe a trade they shouldn't make?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I like that fit because you would still have Jamal Murray.
Yeah.
And then you have two guards that aren't great on defense that both need the ball in their hand.
And they take out of Jokic's hand then as well, don't they? That's
yeah. I think that there are some intriguing trade options for Bradley Beal, but I think that if I'm Denver, I stick with the homegrown approach for now.
Okay, cool. And then in number 4, I assume from what you were saying, then you've got the Jazz.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I had them in third. Well, if I'm honest, I'm actually been quite surprised by them. So it's probably a bit of recency bias. I think Conley looks a lot better than I thought. And I was in the camp of to not pay Rudy Gobert, but he also is in a camp that's now, he's kind of proving me wrong in terms of how good he's been. He's been back to that true elite level on defense. The pick and roll game between him and Mitchell looks as good as ever. They look like they've kind of hashed out any issues they might have had in that pre-COVID time. So I've kind of just tipped them over the edge because I think they're better on defense than the Nuggets. And obviously a little bit of bias. I think they're 4 games ahead, so I've got a bit of a head start. But I think it's very close. What are your opinions on the Jazz as a team?
I think that the Jazz look great so far this year. I think Donovan Mitchell has taken that next step that you're hoping Jamal Murray takes, quite honestly. I think Donovan Mitchell's been great. Rudy Gobert is all league on the defensive end. He has a reputation of getting played off the floor in the playoffs, which I am not necessarily sure he's going to be able to dispel. But I think that a lot of the reason the Jazz are I think they're second in the league right now, is they're off to a hot shooting start that I'm not sure they're going to be able to sustain. I was looking at Donovan Mitchell on Basketball Reference last night, just after that Jazz Nuggets game. And I ended up on the Jazz page. And so far this year, Donovan Mitchell, Royce O'Neal, Mike Conley, Jordan Clarkson, and Joe Ingles are averaging better than their career high season from 3-point range. And they're all good shooters. But I'm not necessarily sure that is going to – I think they're going to regress to the mean a little bit at least. And right now their starting lineup is great. You can't help off of any of their players in the Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert pick and roll. Mitchell is a bowling ball getting to the rim, and Joe Ingles just likes to get to the middle of the floor, throw funky passes, keep everybody off balance. They have a great, fun starting lineup, but I'm not necessarily sure how well they maintain their offense once their shooting cools down a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that the number of points and the efficiency they're doing at can necessarily continue, but they've been involved in some shootouts as well. I think the other teams got hot. That's where I kind of see the regression as well. I think they might actually regress positively in terms of defense and kind of. I know the Mavs, for example, and when they played the Nuggets, both teams shot high from 3%, their highest from the 3-point range against them, and I'm not sure stuff like that will continue either. That's my only thing, because I just think they're so good defensively, especially when Jordan Clarkson's not on the floor. I think that they could kind of halt other teams scoring a little bit, and maybe they're just getting involved in some shootouts because they're shooting so well. I think that if they do regress a bit, they can kind of slow the game down on the defensive end. But yeah, I had them, I think, 7th before the season in the West, so they've definitely kind of disproved me, and they're playing a lot better than I thought. And they killed the Mavs twice, so that's probably partly why I think of them so high.
It's hard for me to put them much higher than 4, even though I know these are regular season rankings.
Yeah,
just because they remind me so much of those Hawks teams from 8 years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
That they're built really, really well for the regular season. And Rudy Gobert is a awesome rim protector when you're not game planning specifically for him. And I don't think Donovan Mitchell's been great, but I don't think he can raise his level of play enough to be the best guy on a championship team. And I don't see them being more than a bow out gracefully after the second round team. I think we're talking about Donovan Mitchell taking that jump, and he did, that we wanted from Jamal Murray. But Jamal Murray is also playing with one of the 5 best players in the league in Nikola Jokic, So Donovan Mitchell doesn't quite have that luxury. So he needs to shoulder even more of a load than he is efficiently. And I'm not quite sure he's going to be capable of carrying that load.
Yeah, they're going to be this year's top 4 seed team for me that the other teams don't mind playing, because you've obviously got to play one of them in the first round. And if I'm a Mavs or a Warriors, whoever finishes in a position to play them, they're the team I'm thinking of the top 4. Like, oh right, we can beat them more easily than we could beat Nuggets and the 2 LA teams for me.
I agree.
But I do think the Jazz have got a good chance of winning 6th Man of the Year with Clarkson and Defensive Player of the Year with Gobert, which I probably wouldn't have definitely. Well, I guess Clarkson's known for his scoring, but for me, he wasn't in my top 3 candidates before the season. But he's kind of been lights out shooting at the ball, so we'll have to see. Any Clarkson bettors will be happy. Cool. Let's go on to number 5 then. See, I think 5 and 6 we might have some differences as well. Who have you got finishing in the 5th spot at the moment?
I was going to say that we're probably going to disagree down here. My 5th team is the Phoenix Suns.
Cool. Yeah, that's not my team. I've gone with the Wiseman-led Warriors in the 5th with a bit of bias. What are your thoughts on the Suns then? Are you worried at all about Booker's kind of not necessarily worse a season, but he's not quite made the jump maybe people thought he would have next to CP3?
Yeah, and I think some of that is the reason why I like them so much, if that makes sense. We have not yet seen Devin Booker even from last year. Like, that guy's in there. Yeah. And Chris Paul at 35 years old still is a blast to watch. Mikal Bridges is one of my favorite players to watch in the league, and I think he is a guy to keep an eye on in the next couple of years to make that next jump from what he is now, which is a great starter on a team, a connecting piece to. I think he can make that jump to top 30, top 25 player. And DeAndre Ayton is hanging on defense. They can go 7, 8, 9 players deep with anyone in the league. I like what they have going on in Phoenix. They're fun to watch and they play hard. And it's hard for me to ever bet against a Chris Paul team showing up in the regular season. They're going to keep their foot on the gas. They're going to play good basketball for 48 minutes with you every night. And they have the talent, especially if Devin Booker picks up his game to the standard we know he can play at, to play with these teams in the West and I think make the playoffs and I think avoid the play-in game.
Yeah, I agree so much with the Chris Paul point. He himself will just play hard for every minute of every game, and he kind of instills that around him. In terms of Booker, I think he needs to get to back to where he was last year, and if he can get to back where he was last year and maybe extend further in terms of his rise to being a true superstar, I think that they could be a very good playoff team. They can be the exact sort of team that could go to against a team like the Jazz and beat them in 7 games, almost like the Nuggets did last year. Just outscore them. I think that's a way that the Phoenix Suns could be. I've been really impressed with Ayton. Like you said, he does hang on the defensive end, which was a worry coming out of college. But offensively, he just looks like an absolute beast. And as a 76ers fan, you must be very upset that you traded away Mikal Bridges, because he's a Villanova kid as well, isn't he? I think his mum worked for the team at some point.
Yeah, they were thrilled. The Bridges family and the Villanova people and the Philly radio stations were all thrilled when we drafted him, and then miserable when we traded him on draft night. And I worked the draft a decent amount, and I had Bridges like 4 on my board that year.
Yeah,
and I was just sitting there like watching that trade happen, like, oh no, like it's all right. We're getting a lot of assets, right? It's gonna be okay. But I had a bad feeling from that night that this one could come back to bite us, and he is making the jump that I think I expected then, and that I really think that he's somebody to keep an eye on as the next couple years go by. To maybe he's the second guy with Booker. And Ayton's been phenomenal too. And if you have a 3-headed monster, even once Chris Paul leaves, of Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton, all 24 years old or less this year, I think that's a dangerous young trio that they have growing out there.
Yeah, I agree. His wingspan is crazy. And for some reason, he developed a bit of a hitch last year in his jump shot, but that seems to have been fixed now. And he's gone back to how he used to shoot at Villanova, which was pretty much lights out. So I agree. I think he's going to be he's maybe a candidate for most improved. I know it's a hard award to win, but he's been very, very good this season. Cool. Well, let's go on to I'll just speak about the Warriors very quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
One of the things I mentioned to you when we were kind of chatting before is that I'm also including the fact that I still think there's a Warriors trade out there. And I was listening to a Washington podcast, a Wizards podcast, and they were basically saying that they think the Warriors have got the best package if that package includes those 2 firsts they've got for next year, one from themselves, one from Minnesota, which could be a top 5 pick. And they would have to obviously include Wiseman in that deal. And I just kind of like the sound of that trade. And whether it's Beal or not, I know they've been mentioning the JJ Redick sweepstakes as well, and they wouldn't have to give up obviously anywhere near as much for JJ Redick. I think that there's a move to be made for the Warriors. And I just think with one more piece, and if that trade includes Oubre going out, maybe, I think that they could be a candidate for this 5th, 6th, 7th sort of area. I think it's going to be very tight from 5th down to 7th. So I think that I'll just go with the Warriors because of Draymond Green and Steph Curry experience, really. I just think that they can beat teams on the nights where maybe the other players aren't playing as well, and Curry could just drop 40 quite efficiently. But they're not as good team as the Suns if you wrote down 1 through 9, for example. But I just think Steph Curry can be that good that I think they might win a couple more. So I put the Warriors in there, and if they get Bradley Beal, I could be easily moving them up to the 3rd spot. That's how good I think Bradley Beal and Steph Curry could be together.
And I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that if instead of ranking where we thought they were going to finish, we were ranking maybe their likelihood of winning a playoff series.
Yeah,
I think the Warriors you can put players around Steph and Draymond and have them resemble a good basketball team just because of the greatness of Steph and Draymond. So I think that you're right there.
I'd love to see a Warriors Clippers series. I think that'd be very spicy. I want Mavs Clippers after last year, but Warriors Clippers would also be good.
What they need to do, they need to just go full scorched earth and let Steph run the way that the Trailblazers let Damian run at the end of last year. I think Steve Kerr has too many like old Warriors ball movement feelings in his heart, and they just need to let Steph have a 35% usage rate and just fire threes from everywhere on the floor.
Yeah, the first 5 games, there was I can't remember the stats, but it was crazy. It was something about the number of touches that the non-2 highest paid players in the league. There was a stat going around, and the Warriors were the highest by far. Basically, Wiggins, Oubre, Wanamaker were getting more touches than some stars on other teams, and Steph was middle of the pack. But now they've kind of upped his usage, and I think he's shooting 3 more shots a game on average.
I would love to see them run the James Harden Rockets offense, where they just say, "Here, you're better than everyone on the basketball court. Go prove it." And I think that'd be great.
I agree. And every 3 or 4 possessions, you just tell Steph to stand in the corner, let Draymond run a set, almost like they used to do with Chris Paul as well when he played with James Harden. Just let Steph have a rest, then he'll go off again like that. That's good. Cool. Well, we'll see if the Warriors are in your 6th spot. Who have you got in 6 for finishing in the West?
I knew you were going to be upset at me about this. My 6 and 7 were the Blazers and the Warriors. And I ended up giving the Blazers the edge here with the reasoning that if I'm talking about where they're going to end at the end of the regular season,
Yeah.
I have way more faith in 3 through 8 on the Trailblazers than I do on the Warriors. I think that Dame is great, and they have unlocked him to the highest degree. CJ McCollum is also scoring well. I think Carmelo's been like he's experiencing a renaissance down there. I I would like to see Robert Covington's shot come back a little bit.
Yeah, he's really declined. He's not playing like a 3 and D player as much as he was 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think.
His defense is still great, but he's shooting 28% from 3. Derek Jones is shooting 25% from 3. They need more from those guys, but I think that I have more faith in the role players in Portland than I do the role players in Golden State.
Yeah, I don't hate that pick either. I was struggling with them a little bit just because of CJ McCollum's injury. I don't know how long he's going to be out. And he was shooting. I think he was shooting 8 threes a game. He was shooting, and I think he was on 40-odd%, and it's his most efficient season from 3-point. It was looking like he was going to be an all-star for the first time in his career, and then unfortunately, he's got this injury that's going to knock him out for probably at least 6 weeks. You'd think. So I thought those 6 weeks without him, they might struggle to score the ball a little bit. But they were in the running for 6th. I've been very biased for my 6th spot, and I've gone with them. I've gone with the Mavs making a turnaround. I've kind of given up all hope on a Bradley Beal trade because I've seen so many articles now about almost what every team can offer, and I just don't think the Mavs are going to be able to offer enough. I know that 3 seasons ago, the Wizards wanted Porzingis from the Knicks, but I don't think they're going to want Porzingis, unfortunately, from the Mavs. But yeah, I still think there's a trade to be made. I don't know if it's Drummond. I don't know if it's John Collins. I don't know if it's Zach LaVine. They're the sort of 3 names that are mentioned. So I've kind of been a bit biased and thought we're going to make a move. And I think the words that are coming out of Luka's mouth at the moment in terms of he's not happy with the effort and he's coming up in a contract in 2 years, I think you need to make some sort of trade that improves you some way that keeps him happy. I don't know which way you go, whether it is rebounding with Drummond or if it's scoring with LaVine, but I think the team need to make something. What are your thoughts? I know you haven't got them anywhere near this sort of top 7, but what are your thoughts on the Mavs kind of getting to that next level and being as good as they should have been at the start of the season? Do you blame COVID or you just think that they're a player away?
Yeah, no, I think that they just found themselves in a bad spot from the jump. I think that Luka, again, we've talked about this. I think Luka is one of the best 7 players in the league, and there's no reason for a team that has one of the best 7 players in the league to be at whatever they're at, 8 and 12. I think a lot of the issue is Porzingis's ongoing health, and he hasn't been great when he's been on the floor. I think that some of the role players that you can usually count on Rick Carlisle to like bring the best out of maybe haven't been up to their standards. Josh Richardson, which we talked about a while ago, we thought Josh Richardson addition would be very helpful for them. He's played in half of the games that they've played. He hasn't been Miami. He hasn't quite been Miami Josh Richardson when he's played. And I think that they just haven't had a full team together to put the pieces together. I'm not necessarily out on the Mavericks. I just kind of think it's like we were saying, the head start thing. I think there are too many talented teams at the bottom of the West for them to maybe climb out of this hole that they're digging themselves.
Yeah, I think if they end up being a playing team, that's going to be a very hard out for whoever they get because you know what Luka's like. He could just have, I think, if you finish 9 or 10 in that range, then you have to win obviously 2 playing games to get in. And I think if they get, I don't know if it'll be the Trailblazers, the Spurs, the Grizzlies, whoever it'll be, I think that they'd have a good chance of getting in. But that's not what they wanted. They wanted to be a top 4 seed, unfortunately. But
yeah, I agree. I don't think their season's over by any stretch of the imagination, and I can't imagine that there's a team that wants to see them, especially if they're rounding into form and healthy by playoff time. I would imagine that would be a very scary out in the play-in games.
Yeah, I agree. I'm praying for a trade though. I was very very biased. It's like NBA 2K at the moment. The amount of trades I'm putting in the trade machine.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go to the East then. I'll start with the first team just so you don't have to be a homer. I've put the 76ers in at the 1 seed. Would you agree with me? You think they're the best team in the East?
Interesting. Yes, I would have to agree with you that right now they are the best team in the East.
Yeah, I've got the Nets still, if I'm honest, to win the actual Eastern Conference title in terms of when it comes to the time when you guys have to play over 7 games, or you might not play if depending on how the Bucks finish, etc. But I think for a regular season team and the amount of defense that you bring, you're not the sort of team that loses those games very often. When you flip on Game Pass and I don't know, the Bucks or the Nets are down like 14 to the Knicks or whoever, and you're like, they kind of just give up too many points and then they don't score enough. Where I think you guys are very much locked in on the defensive end, and that's Doc Rivers' kind of calling card. So I think that your defense will tip you to first in the East, and I think the Bucks, for me, not to spoil it, but I think the Bucks will be a close second. But I think you're a little bit too good in the regular season for them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I know we've talked about the Sixers at length, so I won't go too in depth here. But I think that another contributing factor is that Joel is going for the MVP award, and a lot of the regular season issues the Sixers have had over the last couple of years is that his energy wanes a little bit on the defensive end once you hit mid-March, and you just get, or I guess you typically January, but he's locked in every game, every minute he's on the floor right now, and whether that will be a good thing when it comes playoff time that he hasn't been resting as much, I guess we'll wait and see. But he's locked in every time he's on the floor. The Sixers are not good when he's not in the lineup. They just won their first game of the year without him against the Pacers last night, and it took a monster comeback and Ben Simmons and Matisse Thybulle at the top of a 2-3 zone wrecking things for the entire fourth quarter for that to happen.
Yeah.
So I think that for the Sixers to finish at the top of the East, Joel needs to play 90% of the games the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's very similar to Giannis for me when he was chasing those MVPs. I think that they'll just be too good with him on the floor. Do you have the Bucks in second as well, like me, or have you gone somewhere else?
No, I also have the Bucks at second.
What are your thoughts on them in general? Are they as good as they were last year and everyone else has got a little bit better, or you think they've taken a slight step back with the kind of roster depth they've lost?
I think it's twofold. I think that they've taken a little bit of a step back as in team building with what they have been doing, like how the Jazz are this year. They used to just space the floor and blitz people, on the offensive end. And honestly, they're not as good of a regular season team as they were last year. But weirdly enough, I think that they're better suited for playoff basketball, which at the end of the day is all that really matters. And I think that they kind of looked at some of the deficiencies that they had in the playoffs last year, and they thought, we're going to sacrifice some wins in the short term, but Giannis doesn't care if we're the 1 seed or the 3 seed. We want to compete for titles. And I think that they built their team to compete for titles as opposed to be the scoring leader at the end of the year.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the playoffs is what it's all about. We've seen Giannis kind of stumble a little bit offensively and Middleton taking so many shots. I think that they're just so focused on having a better playoff team. Whether that comes with another buyout guy or two, we'll see. But yeah, I agree. I think they'll sacrifice a little bit on the regular season for that. In third, then, I'd be interested to see who you have here, whether it's your hated Celtics or the upcoming Nets. Who have you got in third?
I actually think that is the pretty clear tier, those top 4, but I have the Nets here strictly on talent. I think that the Nets desperately need a center. I think that the Jarrett Allen inclusion in that James Harden trade hurt them a bit. DeAndre Jordan, quite simply, really shouldn't be playing as a starting center on a contender in the NBA anymore. And I think that the Nets are the sneaky landing spot for Andre Drummond. And I'm not particularly high on on Drummond just as a player, but the jump that it will take from DeAndre Jordan to what I think is going to end up being buyout Andre Drummond. I think that if they can get Andre Drummond on a minimum after a buyout, that vaults them to the far and away Eastern Conference favorite, just because he's not as bad as DeAndre Jordan.
Yeah, no, it's on the defensive end. It's very difficult to be anywhere near as bad as DeAndre Jordan at the moment. I think his numbers are just terrible. He's lost more than a step since the old days. I think he's a complete different player, and he has to thank KD and Kyrie a lot for getting him that 3-year contract that they gave him.
Yeah, he's essentially there to just be everybody's best friend. I don't think they ever expected him to be starting and playing major minutes at the center on this team. And I think if they don't make a deal, I'm not even sure that this Jeff Green at center thing that they're trying is sustainable. I think if they don't get a deal done for a center or pick up a cheap buyout center that can help them, I think you're going to see them playing a lot of Kevin Durant at the 5 and dealing with the issues on defense, because you're going to have issues on defense no matter what. So you might as well at least be good on offense, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be quite strange that an Andre Drummond kind of free agent is going to be the most coveted. Because I think a lot of teams, if he does get bought out and they'd have to do a trade for that huge, crazy contract, I think that probably 5 or 6 teams that we've spoken about are going to be involved. I know, like we said about the Mavs, the Celtics probably wouldn't shock you if they're involved. Yeah. The Nets as well, like we just said. Maybe even a team like the Clippers could even try and be involved. But it's funny how if Andre Drummond is an important kind of clogging a championship machine, you wouldn't have said that like 12 months ago.
Yeah, it's the same thing as the Batum thing. Like, nobody wants Andre Drummond for $28 million a year, but for the minimum, for half a year, sign me up. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, please don't bring him to Philly, but
you got Howard.
Sign them up.
Yeah, you've got enough centers. You don't need any more centers.
Yeah, God, please, God, no more centers.
Cool. Well, yeah, I had the Nets as well in 3. KD, aside from Luka, is my favorite player. I think KD is the best offensive player I've ever seen. I'm quite young to have seen Michael Jordan play live, so it didn't happen very often, but he's way and above LeBron for me offensively, which gets a lot of stick on the podcast. But I just think that he'll lead them to a top 3 seed in the East for me. At 4, then, we've both got the same team then, the Celtics, a team that you don't like very much, but I guess you can see that they're quite a good team with those 2 wings.
Yeah, and it really hurts because when you grow up in the Philly area, you're just bred to not only not like the Celtics, just not like the city of Boston. It's what I was brought up on. But this really is a group of really likable guys. Tatum is a star, and Jaylen Brown is taking that jump this year. He's averaging more points a game than Tatum did in the 13 games that he played. I think that Kemba hasn't really recovered from injury in a way that Boston fans may have hoped. And I think that the young pair of Tatum and Brown, surrounded by they're not the same Boston depth as we're used to saying. A lot of those role guys aren't very good.
Yeah.
But Tatum and Brown are enough to keep them afloat for the 4 seed. But I think that the rest of the team, with this broken up version of Kemba and the loss of Gordon Hayward, bumping everybody up a spot in the rotation, is kind of limiting them to a ceiling of the 4th seed, at least in my rankings.
Yeah, I agree. Preseason rankings, I had them at 3. My co-host Ben had them at 1, actually, and I think he's regretting that choice quite a lot after when he heard the news that Kemba was going to miss 6 weeks. I think he ended up missing slightly more than 6 weeks. And Tristan Thompson as well, as a player that we kind of both thought would do very well with this team. He need to fix that center rotation, but he has played not as well as you'd hope, I guess would be the words. And Daniel Tice is still having to see huge minutes at times, which maybe is not quite what you want from a top East seed. What are your thoughts on?
It was good. Good.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that it was fine when you had Hayward, because there were kind of like the Brooklyn thing. You have Tatum that you're accounting for, you have Brown that you're accounting for, you have last year's Kemba, you have Gordon Hayward. But Kemba losing the step on top of also losing Hayward, that means you need to bump everyone up 2 spots in what you're expecting from them. And like Daniel Theis is great as the de facto center, not in closing lineups and surrounded by those other 4. But when you are relying on him to do that 25-30% more that you were asking from him, and that you're now asking from Tristan Thompson and Semi Ojeleye and all of those guys that they have in there, I don't think that any of them are prepared to take the role that they need to take, and their rookies aren't necessarily providing the impact that some of the other rookies around the league are.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think Boston fans are also realizing how bad Jeff Teague is, which is one thing that we called quite well, because that was not the pickup that I think they should have made. But yeah, he's not been great. Last question on the Celtics: do you think Jaylen Brown has a chance of being an All-Star starter? Because for me, he's been much better than Tatum this season.
Yeah, and I think he's another one. He's an All-Star lock. I think a little bit of his points are inflated because he's playing without Tatum, so he has to shoulder that extra load. But I don't mean that in a bad way, other than it's a reason why he has just quite so many points a game. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him as an All-Star starter, and I wouldn't think that he didn't deserve it. I think that he would be a very deserving pick as an All-Star starter, and if he's not, he will be one of the first guys chosen after that.
Maybe by Doc Rivers. Potentially.
Yeah, maybe. That'd be cool.
Cool. So number 5 and 6, these are the ones that I thought I was going to have trouble with, but I was looking at the rosters and I kind of went a little bit chalky with it. So I'm interested to see where you've gone. Who do you have finishing in the 5th spot?
Yeah, I think I went the opposite of chalky, and this one may just be hopes and dreams, but I have the Miami Heat.
Nice. Yeah,
and
they've been a bit of a disappointment, haven't they? But a lot of that, similar to the Mavs, is very much COVID related.
Yes, it's definitely been COVID related. And quite honestly, after the top 4 in the East, which is super strong, there's nothing that really particularly inspires you. The Heat have had 7 games so far from Jimmy Butler. Tyler Hero is shooting 29% from 3. Their guys aren't there. They're not up to snuff. The players that have played in all of their games are Duncan Robinson and Precious Achiuwa. They're the only 2. Yeah. They haven't had a roster. You can't lose a top 20 guy like Jimmy Butler for all but 7 of your games and expect to keep your head above water. But that being said, I don't expect this COVID situation that they're dealing with to continue throughout the rest of the year. Jimmy Butler will be back and ready to go. And Bam Adebayo has taken a jump. He is a completely different player than he was even in the finals. He's taking mid-range ISOs. He's going to start extending out the 3. He looks like that guy that's going to be the 3rd best big in the league after Joe and Jokic, maybe as soon as the end of this year if he isn't already. He is flying around the floor on both ends. He's one of those work ethic guys that like the Jimmy Butler All-Star. Like when you work that hard and you're as talented as Bam is, it's really hard to fail. And they have that gritty persona down in Miami around Bam and Jimmy, and the guys that will help you in the regular season, like Duncan and Hero and Dragic and Olynyk. And when you tie that together with the best coach, what I believe is the best coach in the league in Eric Spoelstra, and the team getting healthy and playing together, I think that we're going to see them go on a run that maybe doesn't get them as high as the 5th seed. That's probably a little bit ambitious, but I think that they will be in a better position than they are now by the time playoffs come around.
Yeah, I had them around 7 for my total rankings. I think I agree. I think in terms of talent, they're the 5th best team, maybe the 4th, with them and the Celtics sort of competing for that mantra. But like you said, they're in terms of head starts, they're the opposite. They've had like the most awful start in terms of injuries, COVID. Like you said, I think I read a stat that Duncan and Jimmy had played 9 minutes together all season or something like that, and it just doesn't surprise me that they are where they are. But I think it's going to be a little bit too much to climb out of. One thing that might help them is this kind of report that's going around that the league is almost expecting teams to finish with different amount of games, and they're just going to halt it at the date they're going to halt it, and they're going to do it on win percentage. I think if the Heat have a good run, they might see a bit of a benefit from that rather than having to catch up on all those games. I think that could help them, but I still had them slightly outside just because of the awful start.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think when you're looking past 4 in the East, there's not a ton of inspiring teams to choose from. So I think I'm just taking a home run swing on a team whose talent I know I believe in, and hoping that this COVID situation dies down a little bit for them.
I wouldn't shock you if they went on like a 10-game winning streak. They're that good of a team sometimes, especially if the schedule.
And they seem to do that. Yeah, they seem to do that every year too, where the Heat will just outwork everybody for 10 games, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, right, they're right back in it, you know?
Yeah, they did it last year, didn't they? In the middle of the season, they got them to like third
Mhm.
spot. So I think that I could see that. I went with the Hawks just about,
Mhm.
mainly for similar reasons. Actually, they've had a lot of injuries. Gallo and Bogdanovic haven't played as many games or minutes as they'd like. Capella and Collins, I could see one of them being moved on potentially just to help the sort of rotation fit a little bit better. And at the moment, they're sick. They're a couple of games back from the fourth spot. And they've done that without almost with the same team that played last year. So I think there's a little bit more of an upside on the offensive end where they can kind of just win a few more games than they have and maybe not go on those couple of 4 or 5 game losing streaks that they've had.
Mhm.
So I went with the Hawks just because I think there's a little bit of another ceiling with. I'm a Gallinari fan, so I think Gallo and Bogdanovic can take them up a little bit more as the season goes on and they get healthy. So I've gone with the Hawks.
Okay.
Who have you gone in sixth?
So this was actually the hardest spot for me out of all of these. I really wanted to be fun and go with the Hawks, or I love watching the Hornets play. They're probably outside of the Sixers. I've watched the most Hornets games. You know how high I am on LaMelo Ball,
Yeah,
but
he's your guy.
it feels he really is. It feels like at the end of every year, and maybe until the apocalypse when the roaches are there, that you'll look up and the Pacers will be the sixth seed.
Yeah, great. That's who I've
I
got in
don't know
sixth as
what it
well.
is about them. Like, if you look down their roster, like Sabonis has been really good this year, but they lost Oladipo. TJ Warren's barely played. He's done indefinitely. And it just kind of feels like they, at the end of the day, win basketball games. They play really hard every night. And a lot of times in the NBA, that's all you really need in the regular season. Like, if you're talented enough, not everyone's going to show up every night. The Pacers show up every night. Malcolm Brogdon has taken another jump since he left Milwaukee. Sabonis started out looking like a whole new player and has cooled off a little bit, same as Miles Turner. Miles Turner began the year with Defensive Player of the Year hopes that he was definitely keeping up. But they just all the way through their lineup, they work hard. And the Sixers just beat them the other night. Or last night they stymied them with that 2-3 zone I was talking about. And they were up by, I don't know, they were up by 17 when the Sixers went on a 21-2 run to turn it around. But it just felt like they should have won the game. And quite honestly, Indiana kept TJ McConnell in there a little too long. Aaron Holiday was playing really well last night, and they probably should have turned back to him to close the game. But I don't know. I think that the Hawks have more talent. I think that the Hornets are more fun. There's other teams you can make this argument for the sixth seed, but the Indiana Pacers are the cockroaches of the basketball world, and at the end of the day, you're going to look up and they're going to be in the sixth seed.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't want to put them in either. I was mixing them between 5 and 6, to be honest. I kind of just went with a little bit of the crazy offensive nights that the Hawks can put on. But for me, the Pacers they're going to be a top 6 team, like I said. Sabonis playing really well this season. I think Malcolm Brogdon is in contention for an All-Star spot as well, and he's a player that the Bucks are probably extremely disappointed that they've let walk and keep Bledsoe like they did. I think that he'd be the perfect complement to that team they've got at the moment. And I just like how they play on both ends. Defensively, they're good. They're very similar to what you said about the Jazz in terms of that they kind of stay in games like the Suns as well. They can stay in games. They'll work hard. They'll make you kind of defend for the full game. They rebound very well, which you don't. It's kind of not shocking with Turner and Sabonis. And I just think that they'll beat a lot of the bad teams, which, like I said earlier, that's a trait of a good team. If you can go to the Knicks and not lose by 20 points like the Bucks did, and you can just beat them by 4, no matter who's playing, no matter who's out, no matter who's got COVID issues, I think that that's a key part of them. And I didn't want to put them in there, but yeah, they finished 6th for me as well.
Yeah, it sounds like we're on the same page there. Also, just while we're talking about the Pacers, really great that the aftermath of that James Harden trade ended up in that physical for Karis LeVert, and everything worked out as well as it did for him. That's really convenient and probably saved his life. So that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he said that himself, that it's almost definitely saved his life. And in terms of a basketball fit, he's looking forward to joining quite a talented roster. Whenever that is, probably next season, I would guess. But you never know. He could be a playoff player. And if he does get back and he's 90% of what he was, that's another offensive weapon that will just help them score points against these teams that are maybe more superstar driven but haven't got a very good bench. So yeah, I agree. I think it was a good trade for them all round, and definitely good for Karius.
Yep.
Cool. Well, we didn't have too many differences. The West a little bit more, but that's due to my Warriors and Mavs bias. But
yeah, I knew the Mavericks were going to find a way in that.
Yeah, they had to find a way. If they can find a way to Bradley Beal wearing a Mavs jersey and the 6th seed, I'll be very happy, but I doubt it. But cool, we'll wrap it there. Thanks again for joining us, mate. I'm sure we'll speak to you again either throughout the season or when it comes to draft evaluation time at the end of the year.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me on. I always enjoy our talks.
Yeah, and the plan with the rest of the podcast, Ben will be back next week and we're going to review the last 2 weeks in the NBA and then we're going to talk through our all-star selections and maybe go through some kind of early award winners. That's the plan for the next podcast. But thanks again to CJ and thanks for everyone for listening. Go and follow us at _Hardwood Hoops and we'll speak to you next week.